Hari Om. At the very outset, Lord Krishna has indicated to us that action is any day better than inaction. Even if that action is selfish in nature and is profit motivated, it is better than not doing anything at all. And then, by saying that, the Lord was trying to move us from tamas to dynamic activity, which is rajas. Then we come to chapter 3, Karma Yoga, where while we are acting in this desire-prompted manner, the Lord is advising that we keep the same tempo of the activity, but work without any selfish desires or any expectations of reward. By doing so, the ego gets reduced and vasanas get exhausted. Now, as far as activity goes, it is the same. The adjustment is made at the mental level, where our attitude is not for our own self-aggrandizement, but doing it as a devotion to the Lord. In chapter 4, the Lord talks about renouncing actions in knowledge, and by that He is trying to move us from rajas into sattva. Now, what does that mean, renouncing action in knowledge? While we are engaged in activity, keep that constant awareness in the mind that there is a greater principle that presides over all human endeavor, and that our actions are all an expression of our devotion to the Almighty. By doing so, even in the thick of activities, one can maintain their inner poise and serenity. In chapter 5, the yoga of true renunciation, the Lord is trying to clear that confusion, because initially He is encouraging us to act, and then He is suggesting that we renounce those actions. So there is a little confusion. The Lord clears that confusion by explaining what Yajna spirit is all about. Acting for the benefit of the majority at large and not for self-profiting deeds. And this is done in two ways. In chapter 5, he talks about how we can act without the sense of agency. That's the first way. Acting without the sense of agency. What does that mean? When I'm acting and doing a task, remind myself over and over again, it is not that I am doing it, but the work is flowing through me. It is it's prompted by a higher power. So the benefits and the rewards are not mine. It belongs to the higher power that is flowing through me. That's the sense of agency. And the second way is by renouncing my preoccupation and thoughtless indulgence in the fruits of my actions. Why? Because the future is an unknown entity. By worrying about the fruits of my actions, which is in the realm of the future, I am dissipating vital energy. because I have no information about what the future holds. And by worrying about it, my present actions are going to be that much lesser because I am dissipating my energy in this worry. Whereas if I conserve that energy and apply that to the work at hand, my actions are going to be excellent. And excellent work has to produce excellent results. So either way you look at it, worrying about the future and expecting the fruits of your actions is an exercise in futility. Now, having practiced this above scheme that the Lord is talking about, the mind and intellect gets better integrated and is well prepared for the higher purpose, contemplation and meditation. When we practice this Karma Yoga and working in a Yagna spirit for the benefit of the majority at large and not for our own sake, which does not mean that we don't act. We act with the same tempo and energy, but with a little adjustment in the mind that this is not for my personal aggrandizement. I would be rewarded naturally because when I am putting out effort to help others, the others would be helped. In the process, I also would be helped, but that is not my primary focus. That's the idea. So when we act in this manner, the mind and intellect gets integrated, and an integrated mind is the ideal mind for the higher purpose of contemplation and meditation. So now the mind is ready for contemplation and meditation, and yet when you sit down to contemplate and meditate, the mind has to be single-pointedly focused on Brahman and Brahman himself. Now, the mind by its own nature is always distracted into so many different channels. Even while I am talking and you are listening to me, your mind could be maybe 1/20th of your attention is focused on me. The other are all focused in different channels. And that is the nature of the human mind. Meditation requires 100% exclusive focus only on my inner nature. So how do we do that? Our Gurudev suggests that when curiosity is given to a person, because the human mind always wants to know, and if somebody says that there is something interesting, the mind wants to know what it is. And that curiosity gets the mind focused on that particular issue. For instance, if I see one of my friends and I say, you know something? Do you know why Mr. Mehta is so quiet and withdrawn nowadays? And he wants to know, why, tell me why. So then I tell him, you know, he was involved in this kind of transactions, and he got word recently that the FBI is watching him very closely, and he was advised to kind of lie low or else he's going to get into deep trouble. That's why he is now maintaining a low profile and being quiet. Now this guy listens to what I'm saying, and I say, now please don't tell this to anybody because this is something that I have come to know. So please keep it to yourself. And he says, yeah, sure. The very next moment, the first person that he sees, he says, you know something? You know why Mr. Mehta is keeping a low profile these days? And then he blurts out, exactly as I said, 3 different places, 5 different people, so many different instances that I mentioned, everything to the T he remembered and reproduces to the other person. Now, how does he remember all that? Because his mind was focused on, and he wanted to know what that I had to say to him. He was curious to know. In the same way, when the Lord talks about meditation and contemplation, in order to get the listener's mind focused only on Brahman, the Lord suggested 10 different verses. In fact, the first 10 verses of chapter 6, the yoga meditation, is to arouse the curiosity in the seeker, so that he would be, encouraged or motivated to indulge in this single pointed exercise of meditation. So it's like something like an appetizer. The first 10 verses of chapter 6 is like an appetizer to induce that interest in the devotee. He says, he who performs his obligatory duties without expectations of fruits of actions and without desires is truly a sannyasi and a yogi. Now, as I told you, the mind, when it worries about the fruits of your actions and has expectations of the future, gets dissipated. The vital energy gets dissipated, and thereby your present performance is compromised. The one who wants to do his obligatory duties, which is what we are expected to do. The obligatory duties are our daily duties, and the nitya karma and the nitya karma. These are the obligatory duties. So we have to do our obligatory duties without any selfish desires and any expectations of the fruits of our actions. Anyone who does that is truly a sannyasi and a yogi. Now, a sannyasi is one who has renounced all attachment to fruits of his actions. He functions in this world with no expectations of reward or acclaim from anybody, but he does that for the benefit of everybody. If they benefit, they do so. If they don't, that's okay too. If they appreciate it, that's fine. If they criticize him, that's fine too. That's the attitude of a sannyasi. Now, a yogi is one who is trying to yoke his mind up to the higher. Now, to yoke your mind up to the higher, it is impossible when your mind is attached to the lower, baser, sensuous things. So naturally, one is complementary to the other. One has to be a sannyasi to become a yogi. And when you act in that manner, when you have no expectations of reward and you just do it because it is a task that has to be done, your actions become perfect. Why? Because you have no expectations, there are no encumbrances to your work. And the happiness that you get in doing your job perfectly is your reward. It is our common experience that we imagine future gains and glory and start acting. Now, every one of us come up with different goals and plans based on our fantasies about the future. So we make a plan, a goal, and start working. But no sooner do we start working, the goal disappears. And then we modify that goal. How many different such projects have we tried you know, people talk about New Year resolutions and various other things. We make sincere goals and then start working, but the moment we start working, the goal gradually disappears, and then we modify that goal, and then subsequently we re-modify, and so on and so forth. This is called Sankalpa Shakti. The Lord recommends that we renounce this Sankalpa totally. We have to get rid of this self-poisoning, self-defeating Sankalpa. And for that, the Lord prescribed Karma Yoga as an external aid to get rid of this Sankalpa problem. So, it is recommended universally across the board to everybody. Start with Karma Yoga, meaning do your obligatory duties without selfish interest and without desires or expectations from the future. And when you do that, your mind will get calm. And then there is the famous metaphor that is used in this context, and that is that of mounting the steed. Mounting the steed is, mounting the horse. Now, Arjuna is familiar with horse riding, so that's why the Lord uses that example to mount the steed. For example, the horse from the wild is broken in and it is standing there. If you want to, the rider, if he wants to get onto the horse and ride it, he has to put the stirrup on and the saddle on, and once everything is put on, he has to now mount the horse. In order to do so, he puts his foot, one foot on the saddle, the other foot is still on the ground, and then holding the reins, he tries to kick himself over the back of the horse. At some point, he would be neither on the ground nor on the horse, but yet, after a few tries, he gets on the horse. When the rider gets on top of the horse, on the back, and has his legs firmly on the side of the horse knows that the master is there. And thereafter, the horse follows the master's orders and commands implicitly. That metaphor is used in the same, in the context of our mind. Our mind is like this wild horse. It has to be tamed, and we need to be in total control of that mind. In order to do so, all these sadhanas that had been prescribed to us, Karma Yoga and Yajna Spirit and so on. The horse knows that his master is there and implicitly follows his commands. In the beginning, we are merely workers in this world, ego-driven and desire-prompted. We toil, we get frustrated and disillusioned. All of us act in this world with desires, and then we put out our effort and keep on toiling. We do succeed in some ways. There are pleasures. Nobody says that, life is totally a misery. There are short, fleeting pleasures here and there. But for the most part, there's frustrations and insufficient reward for all the toil that we put in. So at some point, we get frustrated with this, and the mind wants something higher. That's when we turn to, and we get disillusioned, and then we come to desire to mount the steed of our mind for higher purposes. We want to control these desires in our mind and focus it on higher purposes, so-called the mounting of the steed. Such a person undertakes work without egocentric desires in the Yajna spirit. So once we come to that point where we are disillusioned with our usual activities in this world, because it doesn't give us that happiness and satisfaction that we desire. Then we come to realize that true happiness is in being in contact with Brahman. And then we want to turn our mind towards that. For that, we need to bring our mind under control. So, at that point, we undertake work without egocentric desires in the yagna spirit, which has already been talked about earlier. We keep on working, but without any personal selfish motives or desires, and doing it for the better benefit of the people at large. And when we do that, this cleanses the mind of its past impressions, meaning the vasanas. When we act in this manner, vasanas get cleansed. I had indicated to you earlier on the BMI chart, it is the vasanas that exert pressure on the intellect which manifest. The vasanas are unmanifest in me right now. But the vasanas express at my intellectual level as desires. These desires make my mind very agitated because the desires always want fulfillment. So the mind gets restless and agitated to fulfill these desires that are in the intellect. And when the mind gets very agitated, it prompts the body to act in that desire-prompted manner. This is how we have been acting, and we are continuing to act in that manner all the time. When we indulge in work without desires, without selfish motives and ulterior motives, these vasanas get less and less. And lesser the vasanas, lesser the desires at the intellectual level. You can imagine that if there are no vasanas at all, there will be no desires at the intellectual level, and the mind would be perfectly calm. And that is the state of Godhood. Once a certain amount of concentration is gained, he slowly stops his activities and applies himself more and more in meditation. So when we act in this manner to cleanse our mind and reduce our vasanas, at some point our mind gets to a point where it is able to concentrate. And that's the time that you would sit down in contemplation and meditation and starts the introspection process. Only when your mind is under your control can you give up obligatory duties. The Lord says, only when your mind is totally under your control that you can give up your obligatory duties and focus only on uplifting your mind to Brahman. But then, how do we know that our mind is now totally under our control? The Lord says, when there are no more sensuous thoughts and actions, and there are no impulses to fulfill our desires, when we know that there are no sensuous thoughts, and there are no desires in my mind that compels me to fulfill my desires, that is an indication that I am now in control of my mind. And that kind of a situation is called Yoga Ruddha, meaning by doing my sadhana, I have now got control of my mind. You have to help yourself by yourself in this effort. Now, to accomplish this, nobody else can help you. Not even your guru or your master can help you. Even though there are some gurus who might say, don't worry, I'll help you reach nirvana or to reach heaven. That's not possible from a practical standpoint. You have to do it yourself. So to speak, in English they say, you've got to pull up yourself by your bootstrings. And when you are able to lift yourself a little bit, the Lord recommends maintain that little improvement. Don't let up and fall back. Keep that level of improvement, and from there you go a little step higher. Desires make your mind to move away from your intellect. Again, on the BMI chart, if you remember, there is vasanas there, and body, mind and intellect at the next level. When there are desires in my intellect, the mind and body move further and further away. When the mind is functioning without the benefit of the intellect, that's when we get into deep trouble. The Lord says, when the mind and intellect are together, it's called the well-integrated mind, where the mind and intellect are together. That is your best friend. By the same token, when the mind and intellect are further apart, that is your worst enemy. And you can imagine that. If I'm going to function at my mind level only, without the benefit of the intellect telling me what is right and wrong, I would give in to every desire in my mind, and I would pursue that. And naturally it will lead me into deep trouble, and I'll have to pay significant consequences for that kind of behavior. So it is your worst enemy when your mind and intellect are separated. But when they are integrated together, that is your best friend. Desires make your mind move away from your intellect. When mind and intellect are integrated, they are your best friend. When separated, they are your worst enemy. Your equanimity is guaranteed when this kind of a person who has a well-integrated mind, he is assured that his mind will be equanimous in heat and cold, joy and sorrow, honor and dishonor. These are at the three different levels. At the body level, the heat and cold. Heat and cold is felt by the body. So in this world, there are various ups and downs in life. Heat and cold at the body level, joy and sorrow at the mind level, honor and dishonor at the intellectual level. There is no point complaining about these things and getting disturbed about it, because that is the nature of this world. Our Gurudev says, you made a mistake by being born into this world. Now that you are born into this world, don't complain about these joys and sorrows and honor and dishonor and heat and cold and everything. Bear it and get on with your life. He gives the example of going for a sea bath. You cannot go for a sea bath and then complain that the waves are coming and beating on you. If you don't want the waves to beat on you, don't get into the sea. But if you want to get into the sea, expect the waves to come at you. Make it a sport. If it is a big wave, dive under it. If it is a small wave, you jump over it. Make it a sport. So sometimes you may fall down, sometimes you may get it right. That is what life is all about. Make life a sport. Do your best and don't get upset about the ups and downs in life. And he is a master of all circumstances. For him, a lump of earth, for that kind of a person who has an integrated mind, a lump of earth meaning a lump of sand or soil, a bar of gold or a big piece of rock are all of same value, meaning they are valueless. As an example, little children's toys. My grandson has various different kinds of toys. I admire them and I play with them, and in fact I appreciate all the finer details on those little cars and little planes that he plays with. And I appreciate it and I look at it but I have no desire in my mind to own them. Whereas the child, he wants to hold on to it. Even when he is sleeping, he wants to keep it by his bedside. Now, why am I not interested in that? Because I have moved away. I'm in a different plane of consciousness. In the same way, all these things, for an integrated person, all the things in this world are of no value. He appreciates whatever that's going on, he admires good things, but he has no desire to acquire them or to keep them for himself. This equanimity applies to all beings. Oh, there's another one. He's a master of all circumstances, like the anvil. Kutastaha. You know what an anvil is? It's a large piece of iron, a big block of iron, on which the blacksmith, he heats up iron rods, and when it is red hot, he keeps it on this anvil and beats it to whatever shape that he wants to do it. When he does that, this little piece of iron that he is trying to shape will mold it into the shape that he is beating it. But the anvil, that block of iron that was at the base, will not change at all. In the same way, an integrated person is like an anvil. He does not change, but in him and because of him, others change. That's called kutastaha. This equanimity applies to all beings as well. This kind of an equal attitude towards everything is possible only for an integrated mind. You and I, we have different ways by which we deal with others. For my child, I have special interest and attachment. For my spouse, maybe a little less attachment. And then for my family, even a little less. And then for friends, lesser. And then for neighbors and co-workers, lesser. And then for the total strangers, I have total indifference. I have grades in my mind as to my attachment and interest in different people. But for an integrated person, everybody is the same. Our Gurudev gives a beautiful example. If my finger accidentally pokes my eye, I don't get angry with my finger for poking my eye and causing me pain. In fact, when my finger pokes my eye, Gurudev says, the other 4 fingers go to console that eye, saying, I am so sorry. For the sake of this finger, these other 3 fingers also go and say, I am so sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. And the eye, also hurting and also maybe red and tearing, it says, I know, don't you know, I forgive you. Why? All because I pervade every cell in my body. Gurudev says, if somebody tells you that he has a big pin, now he is doing an experiment and he wants to poke that pin into your body. Tell me which part of your body would you want me to poke this pin into? Can I poke it into your toe? He says, no. Can I poke it into your leg? He says, no. Can I poke it into your tummy? No. How about your arm? How about your nose? Now, basically, there's no place in my body that I want him to poke that pin into. In fact, I tell him, if you really want to poke that pin, why don't you poke it into this guy? Not me. Because I value every cell in my body. Only because I pervade every cell in my body. Suppose I feel an itch on my right calf muscle and I'm busy doing something, but I feel that itch. My hand readily gives up whatever I'm doing and goes to scratch that leg. Does my hand ever say, wait for a little while, I'm busy doing something else? it immediately goes there. And when it scratches, the happiness that the leg gets when you scratch the leg is the happiness of the hand that goes to scratch it also. In fact, the whole being enjoys that scratching. That should be the attitude when we take other people. When you see somebody in trouble, you go in immediately, spontaneously, to help that person. And the help that you give that person not only gives happiness to that person, but to you and to everybody. That is the universal attitude that we need to have in our actions towards others. And that equanimity applies to beings. Getting hurt in any part of the body. And that is the example that the Lord gives. Now, these are the first 10 verses, the appetizers for the meditation. Now, the Lord, you can imagine in the din and row of the war situation, where Arjuna is standing in the middle of the two armies. The Lord does not spare any pain at this point to give him detailed instructions as to how to meditate, including where to sit, how to sit, what kind of a seat to sit in, what kind of a posture to maintain. All that would be discussed in our next talk, which we'll take in next time. Thank you.
Thank you.